So the Denver Broncos had a draft officially, even though they didn't pick until pick 64. Listen, they traded for Russell Wilson. Again, one of these teams where it's like, okay, you don't have a first round pick, but you got Russell Wilson, so who cares? They also ended up with a lot of players and some very talented players. So starting off at 64 with Nik Bonitto, who some people felt like should go a lot higher. So he's someone where this is kind of the thing where I think analytics and tape have to be blended together. Bonitto is a guy who won a lot at college. And at the edge rush position, if you do win a lot at college, there's reason to believe that you can be a good player. That translates pretty well. The issue is when you watch his tape, so many of his moves, you're just like, yeah, that's not going to work at the NFL level. But again, this is where things get weird, right? Because maybe he only did those moves because they did work at the college level. His job isn't to showcase his talent and to make him seem like he's going to be a good NFL player. His job is to get to the quarterback, which he did a great job of. So that's where things get interesting. At 64, I do like this pick, and I'm fascinated in seeing, will this guy work out? Because he is an extreme example of someone who got production, but it was kind of weird production. So that's why I'm concerned. But like, listen, last year I said, oh, don't draft Gregory Rousseau. All of his production won't work at the next level. And then his production worked at the next level. So maybe I need to stop paying attention to that. And, this year I've said, okay, now I realize production actually matters a lot more for those types of positions, not because of Rousseau, but that was one of the reasons. So Bonitto might be a Gregory Rousseau type who, he was the Bills edge rusher last year. So fascinating guy with Bonitto. At pick 80, the Broncos got Greg Dulcich here, I had him as my tight end too. So getting him at 80 is good. Granted, I believe I had like around this grade on him. He didn't make my top 64 prospects. So, this feels about right to draft him, to be honest. He feels like a great friend of Russell Wilson is what I would say. He just seems like someone who Russell Wilson will love to throw the football to. Kind of a pure receiving tight end, can run routes well. So again, when you're trying to get value at these types of, picks, sometimes the move is just say, hey, who's someone who I know will be like a solid role player? I'm not worried about trying to hit home runs here. They don't need to hit home runs. They have a pretty solid team like around Russell Wilson. So I think they're all right. At pick 115, Damarri Mathis is an interesting player. Wasn't spectacular in college necessarily, but is explosive and is physical as well. Got a lot of penalties, so that's kind of an issue with him. But physical guy, 5'11", 195. So fine height and weight, nothing spectacular, but he can move pretty well on top of it. So could be, they could use another corner in the building. Will he be able to start? I don't know, but there's at least potential for it. Their next pick, they went with Eyioma Uwazurike. I think Uwazurike is how I'm going to go with it. Uwazurike, again, some of these names are tough. I apologize. Make a name for yourself. I'll certainly learn to pronounce it. That's a good way to, maybe potentially drive some people, right? Like, hey, make me not be able to pronounce it wrong because everyone will be saying it. Uwazurike is someone who I'm very fascinated with as a player because his numbers were solid. Like a 16.7 pass rush win rate is solid. Like that's not bad for someone who's going at pick 116 and someone who was 178 on the consensus draft board. And yeah, that's what you're looking at. Number next to each of their names is the consensus draft board ranking. Number all the way to the left, when they got drafted, of course. Fascinating player, definitely someone who wins with pure power. That's where he's going to get his wins. That's what he does. He is a power rusher at 320 and 6'6". So because of that, there's definitely some reason to be interested in him. And he played some edge as well. So even though he's 320, which is wild, so interesting there. Delarin Turner Yell. I feel like those letters, I feel like they should be different ones. But whatever. Interesting guy. Safety here, who, has good traits. So he's someone who is maybe a toolsy prospect. Can you mold him to be a good player? And we're talking 5th round guys here. Who knows what exactly will happen? And same thing like Montreal Washington, who was 641st on the draft big board, on the consensus big board. Believe it or not, I did not get to Montreal, Washington in my evaluation. I did not get 641 guys down that list. But from what I understand about him, could be a good kick returner. So for the 5th round pick, there's value there. Definitely a small guy at 5'10", 170. So might just be a special teams guy who could be a slot guy as well. Seems to be the logic there. Luke Wattenberg is a center. Listen, you can get quality centers later on because not that many teams are drafting centers. So that could be interesting. Again, don't know. He just seems like an interesting pick for the Denver Broncos. His advanced statistics weren't spectacular, but they weren't horrible either. So he's someone who seems like he'll just be a fine center, especially for a fifth rounder. Like he seems like a fine backup center is kind of from what I understand about him. That's probably where he will be. Matt Henningsen is another very fascinating guy. So he's a little bit undersized for a defensive lineman at 291 and at 6'3". But again, seems like he could be fine. Doesn't really use his hands too much, so that might actually be a good thing because that means you can coach him up and he can get better, right? Like, why wasn't his production fantastic? Well, if there's actually reason for it, maybe you can coach him up and get better, or maybe you can't, and then the 206th pick isn't a great pick. You'll probably live. Finally, at 232, Faion Hicks. Seems like he'll just be a special teams guy. Again, 390 on the consensus. Big board. So cornerback, kind of a smaller corner at 5'10", 192. So seems like that's where he's going to be at. So it seems like they got some special teamers on this team because he had a decent amount of later round picks, but some quality players as well. Greg Dulcich, I think, is maybe my favorite on this list, even though he wasn't the next one picked. But again, Mathis I find interesting. Uwazurike I found interesting. And then Nik Bonitto I definitely find interesting. He's a boomer bust type guy. So either you got a really good edge rusher or, hey, you have a pretty complete roster anyways. You don't need the draft for need too much. That's kind of the way I see it. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. What are your thoughts on all of this? Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.